Hello dear arithmetic friends. Today we're going to talk about classification of numbers. Let's go. First of all, we have to say that all numbers are complex. So we write complex numbers, and into the set of complex numbers we have real numbers and imaginary numbers. After, I will explain it. Into the real number set we have the rational numbers and irrational numbers. Into the irrational numbers set we have integers and fractional. And into the integers set we have naturals, 0, and negatives. But into the fractional number set we have exact and periodic. But into the periodic number set we have the pure numbers and the mixed numbers. But into the naturals numbers we have the number 1, the prime numbers, and the composites. Let's explain each one. First of all, a complex number is any number. For example, 2, 3 over 4, 5 plus imaginary, etc. Now let's see. Imaginary numbers are those that come from roots, but negatives into a root. Square root of -4, fourth root of -1, etc. Why? And why? Because you are not going to find a number that multiplied an even number of times by itself gives you a negative number. For instance, -1 multiplied by -1 gives you +1, not -1. That's why we're calling it imaginary number. Also, -2 times -2 gives you +4, not -4. Or +2 times +2 gives you +4, not -4. That's why we're going to call it imaginary numbers. Real numbers are all other numbers that are not imaginary. For example, -7, square root of 4, third root of -1 also is a real number, because -1 times -1 times -1 gives you -1. It is possible to calculate it. It is not imaginary. If you have odd roots, you can calculate them, and those are real numbers. Now, rational numbers are all numbers that you can write in the form an integer over another integer. For instance, 4, because you can write it 4 over 1. 3 over 4, also 3.5, because you can write it as 35 over 10, no problem. Irrational numbers are pi, square root of 2, etc. Those are numbers that have decimals, that are not periodic, that will go to infinite, and will never end. And decimals are not going to repeat. Okay? For instance, pi is 3.14, 16, 52, etc., etc., etc. And you will never repeat those decimals. Also, square root of 2. In general, some square roots will give you irrational numbers, but all others are rational. So, integers are those numbers that don't have decimals. For instance, 10, minus 9, etc. And fractional numbers are those with decimals. For instance, 3/7, minus 3.5, 0.3, 3, etc. to the infinite. Those are fractional numbers. Now, naturals are those numbers that you use to count. For instance, 1, 3, 12, etc. Integer positives are naturals. The zero, everyone knows the zero, and negatives, -1, -3, etc. After that, the number 1, the whole world knows the number 1. Prime numbers are those numbers that you can divide exactly by themselves and by 1. For instance, 2, 3, 5, etc. And composites are those numbers that you can divide by themselves, by 1, and by other numbers. For instance, 6, you can divide 6 by 1, by 2, by 3, and by 6. For instance, 8, you can divide it by 1, by 2, by 4, by 8. Okay? And now you have fractional exact. You have 0.35, for example. The last number ends, and that's it. And the periodic goes to infinite. For example, pure numbers, pure periodic numbers are 0.666666666, etc. Just after the point, you have some numbers that repeat and repeat and repeat. Another example, 0.373737, etc. That's why I'm writing that line. And mixed numbers are those that have some decimals that are not repeating, for instance 1, 2, and decimals that are going to repeat and repeat and repeat to infinite. For example, 1, 2, and after that 7, 4, 7, 4, 7, 4, etc. Well, there are many classifications of numbers, but I think this is a good classification to understand other concepts in math. Now I'm going to show you that you can represent that in Venn diagrams. Let's see. Well, another form of showing the classification of numbers is a Venn diagram, where you study the universe set. That means the complex numbers, all numbers are complex. Into that set you have imaginary numbers and real numbers represented with an R. Into the real numbers set you have rational and irrational. You write a Q because in Italian you say quotiente. Into the rational set you have fractional numbers and integer numbers. And fractional numbers are exact or fractional pure periodic or fractional mixed periodic. Into the integer set represented with a Z, because in German you write Zahlen, that means number, a Z, you have the whole numbers, the positives with the 0, and the negative numbers. And into that you have the natural numbers. And into that set you have the number 1, the prime numbers, and the composite numbers. Remember that the prime numbers are those that can be divided by themselves and by 1, exactly, without some decimals. And composite numbers are those that can be divided by themselves, by 1, and by other integers. That's all, dear friends. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.